All right, welcome to the AdaptX podcast, where we have conversations with individuals building accessible businesses, advocating for inclusion, or excelling in adaptive sports. Today, I'm joined by Dan Minnich, the co-founder and executive director of Waypoint Adventure, a New England-based nonprofit that offers accessible outdoor recreation designed to foster personal growth, social skills, and empowerment through experiential learning. Dan, thanks for joining me.
Brendan, thank you for having me.
I guess I'd like to start with the origin story, both for you personally and for Waypoint as an organization. So let's maybe start with you. What was your first introduction to disability, and maybe what was the influence behind Waypoint?
Yeah, I guess I'd like to start, right? I don't identify as a person with a disability myself. So my journey into this space, we had a family friend named Tammy Passwater who worked at a social service agency for adults with mostly intellectual disabilities, who invited me to come and volunteer. I think I was in middle school. And I had the opportunity to go out with her as she was taking adults with disabilities into the community. So a little more field trip oriented than adventure. But I think that was probably one of my first early, opportunities to interact with people with disabilities. I don't have a family member with a disability. And then I ended up at UNH in Durham, New Hampshire, and qualified for work study. And so that's to help pay off my student loans. And so at that time, you go into an office and they have a 3-ring binder that tells you all the jobs that you can do. And I didn't care what I did. I just needed to help pay off my student loans. So I went down the $1 an hour column and found the one that looked like it was going to pay the most. And I got a job that paired me one-on-one with 3 young men who also had disabilities. And so with one, we were going to the YMCA to work out. With another, we were participating in a Northeast Passage after-school program, and the other, a Friday night kind of social gathering with same-age peers. And interacting with them and their families, I began to see and hear that they weren't doing some of the things that I just enjoyed doing for fun. So they didn't have opportunities as much to go on hikes or rock climbing. I also worked at the campus ropes course that was getting middle and high school students from around Durham, New Hampshire, for community building day, or as they were progressing from 5th grade to middle school, interacting with students from other schools. And these guys went to those schools, but had never been to the ropes course, because when it was their class or their, age time to go to the ropes course, the teachers, administration made the decision that, well, they can just, stay back at school. And so I kept having some of these aha moments that, all right, these young men who are only a few years younger than myself don't have some of these opportunities because or related to the fact of their disability. And I all of a sudden was presented with, oh, now I know this now. Yeah. So what am I going to do about it? And then had a chance to volunteer and then work for an organization called Outdoor Explorations, which was in Medford, Mass, just outside of Boston. And their whole mission was getting people with and without disabilities to go on adventures together. And I loved it. I personally loved spending time outside. And all of a sudden, I was spending time outside with folks who often had not had the opportunity to do some of those activities. So again, going hiking, going kayaking, overnight backpacking trips. And I worked there for 2 years. And another guy joined the organization. His name was Adam Combs. And we worked together there for 2 years. And then that organization, which had been open for about 20 at that point, closed. So this was in 2010. Factors related to the downturn in the economy in 2008. They lost a few major funders. And then they had 3 different executive directors over the course of 3 years. And I think that just complicated things for the organization. So we got laid off. They closed the organization, and we were presented with the opportunity of either we go get jobs doing something else, or maybe there's a network of people, individuals and schools and social service agencies who were engaged in programs, and some donors and volunteers, who all wanted to see that mission continue. So kind of we naively jumped into to starting Waypoint at that point. So 2010 was when we officially started Waypoint.
Yeah. Well, you identified a need. You thought you had a solution, but like, did you know the logistics of operating a nonprofit? Were you studying business? Like, I guess what gave you the confidence to launch an organization?
I said we naively. So no,
you did preface it with
I
that.
was a program coordinator leading trips, as was Adam.
Yeah.
And we loved it. And we didn't want to see that go away. And as that organization contracted, we did have the opportunity to learn a bit more about the administration of writing a grant proposal, of just some of the infrastructure that goes into an organization like that, because other folks were unfortunately let go before we were, because we were running the program sort of, the ones implementing the actual mission. So we were some of the last to get laid off. So we had a little bit of understanding, but again, no, we had never managed a business. We had never, started a business or an organization. So it was a lot of jumping into the unknown and being uncertain, but recognizing that we cared a lot about the mission and what we were doing, and wanted to try.
I mean, that's how you learn, right? Like, there was no roadmap for when I started my gym or for the nonprofit that we're operating right now. You just kind of respond to the challenges that arise. But I think it's interesting too, because before we started recording, you talked about how programs are running without your involvement, and that took 15 years to get to, or whatever. You kind of hit that tipping point. But you go from someone who's passionate about the subject matter, so outdoor recreation, to someone who's now thrust into a different role, which is more so just like managing. Do you have, well, I shouldn't say do you have a preference, because I'm sure you would love to be the one going on the hikes all the time, but like, how have you adjusted to like your new role? Well, it's not a new role, but as like the executive and the one assembling all of the work, as opposed to...
Yeah. So I have said along the way that one of the things I love about Waypoint and this journey has been the variety that I've gotten. And so as the organization has grown, my responsibilities have changed from being the one leading the trips to now, I have a great team of people who were leading a kayaking program yesterday evening and another kayaking program this morning, and I'll hear the stories, this afternoon. I get on about an adventure a month. But it's been a journey for me personally to learn new skills and, to have to continue developing myself as the organization grows. Yeah.
In that introduction to Waypoint, I mentioned experiential learning. At least that's, I think, how you guys define it. Can you maybe elaborate on what that is?
Sure. So when I describe Waypoint, I will often say we run adventure education programming. So I mentioned the ropes course at UNH. They're the Wharton Business School in Pennsylvania, and Boston College is MBA program, and Harvard's first-year students and first-year students at Princeton all have opportunities to do this, adventure education. They go on an experience in the outdoors where they're challenged, they're encouraged to step out of their comfort zone, they're working with peers, and they're discovering what do they learn about themselves within that community, and how does what they experience out on a backpacking trip or a canoe trip or going rock climbing, how does what you learn in those environments translate back to whether you're going to school or in a place of business. So Waypoint uses adventures as a teaching and learning opportunity. And so more important to us than, do you become a rock climber or a kayaker is, what did you learn today? And how does that apply back into whether you're in school or work or your family situation, moving out of your parents' home? The adventures that we lead are kayaking, rock climbing, riding tandem cycling, or riding tandem bikes, cross-country skiing in the wintertime. So we do those adventures, and we're doing it with folks with disabilities. So that does fall into the adaptive sports arena. When I think about other organizations that are in that adaptive sports arena in Boston, there are Spalding Adaptive Sports and All Out Adventures in Western Mass and Access Sport America. And there is some overlap with all of these organizations. And we often find ways of collaborating or partnering with each of them. many of those places are a little bit more focused on the adaptive sports side of things. So the physical function of going kayaking or trying to golf, and being a person who might use a wheelchair. How do you make that happen? And often then they're doing it with an individual. So you have trip leaders or occupational therapists who partner with an individual and talk through their goals and show them adaptive equipment if that's necessary, and then go and do the activity. That happens at Waypoint, but usually at Waypoint, we're doing it with a group. And so we come together as a community, and there's this support that happens between participants as well as from trip leaders to participants, that encourages people to, not just how do I do this myself, but look around and where can I contribute towards somebody else's success, and encouraging them to step out of their comfort zone. And then, again, what did I learn about that experience, and how can I take what I learned from here back into the rest of my life?
How do you quantify, I guess, the success of that? Because I think as like nonprofits, we're always trying to come up with the metrics to measure our impact, right? And how far a dollar will go if donated. And with adaptive sports, maybe you just look at number of participants, performance and competition. But for you, you're measuring some qualitative metrics as well. Have you found a way, I guess, to kind of measure the success of your programs?
Yes, and we keep refining it.
Yeah.
So right now we're working with an organization to do some research and evaluation on programs. Okay. And so it is continually changing. And it is challenging because it's not just did somebody improve from not knowing how to do this outdoor skill to now being able to do it. But when we talk to an individual or a teacher or a program director about what are the strategies that you're working on within your organization around employment or communication and advocacy for yourself, because the goals might be different each time, and we're custom designing a curriculum for that group of individuals, it's a little hard to then, we can measure success today, but if everybody's goal is slightly different, it is challenging.
Yeah. I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges whenever you're trying to quantify, I guess, the success of an organization and the trajectory. Like, I guess I'll let you feel free to take a sip, but you mentioned a bunch of other organizations, Spalding, et cetera, maybe doing similar things. Do you find that you've been able to successfully collaborate with them? Just because in my experience, sometimes nonprofits like operating in isolation to a degree because you're kind of competing for the same resources with some of these other organizations. So has collaboration been a pretty important part?
Yes, yeah. I think that's been a major part of Waypoint's success. So Spalding contracts Waypoint every year to lead a series of rock climbing programs, and we love working with Spalding. Yeah. We will be at Dunn State Park with the Department of Conservation and Recreation and All Out Adventures on Friday. Yeah. So yes, I think collaborating has been a major part of our success, and I do get, I see their annual reports, right? Yeah. And I see when, they successfully got this foundation or this corporation to fund their program. Yeah. So there is also some competition for some of those dollars that, enable our missions to be successful. But finding ways to partner together and collaborate has been a major part of, our success over the years. Yeah. Playing nice with people. I think I don't see another way. I don't want my goal isn't to build a kingdom of waypoints, right? All over the world. Our vision is life to the fullest in a fully accessible world. And so, sometimes, I don't know when that will happen, right? When will Waypoint be able to close because the world is fully accessible? I don't know that we'll ever get there, right? There's a lot of work in front of us, but working towards a vision of this is the world we want to live in, right, means I think our team, right, has the attitude of these aren't just our competitors. These are people who are also helping to create a world that we want to live in. Yeah. So,
they extend your mission, right? And without them, you can't be everywhere at once. So,
no, I don't want to be.
Yeah. Accessible world. Maybe let's talk about what that looks like for you guys, because you're in trails, you're climbing mountains, you're on rock walls in the ocean, etc. Like, let's focus on the trails first, because I know there's some legislation that revolves around that as well. So what committees and legislation are you guys working on?
Well, maybe just the idea of, what's the world that we're working towards look like? We just celebrated the 35th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Yep.
ADA is legislation that speaks into different environments that people live in. Education, work, transportation. And it's not Waypoint's intent that all outdoor spaces are ADA compliant. So there are rules to, the degree of a slope, for example, on a path or a trail. I don't think we should pave all of our trails. There are people who want different levels of challenge, right? And so a lot of people would be very upset if we smoothed everything out and paved everything. It would take away the opportunity for us to challenge ourselves. And there are people who need that degree of slope and need a certain degree of smoothness on the trail for it to be accessible for them. So finding ways to create a percentage of space that really are accessible for anybody to use their own manual or power chair. The legislation that you mentioned, there is a bill before the Massachusetts legislature right now called Unpaved Trails for All. And so they are focusing on increasing access for people with mobility issues. So it's not just the surface of the trail, but gate access and parking and bathrooms are also being considered as part of that legislation. And Waypoint is part of a trail advisory working group that's looking into, rating systems of how do you identify one trail from the other and how do people understand, okay, I could do this one, but maybe not that one. And talking about some of those other issues like gate access, et cetera.
Yeah.
So
what can conservation departments, land managers do, I guess? Like, what should they be aware of, I guess, if they're in community preservation, if they manage trails? Like, I guess, what are best practices, or who should they inquire to?
Well, maybe the first question, right? What should they be aware of?
Yeah.
25% of the world's population has a disability.
Yeah.
Right. So if they're not considering those people, they're missing out on a huge portion of our population who would like to access. And, within that 25%, there is a very broad array, right, of supports that are needed or not needed for somebody to access. So for some people, it might be the surface of the trail or the gate access and the parking and restroom. For other people, it might be an invitation to know that they're welcome to come, or signage, or having somebody who can communicate in a way. So a sign language interpreter, or using Braille, right? It's not just one thing. So I think being aware that there are people who would like to access if they could, and then talking to their constituents to find out, okay, right, how can we make our property accessible to as many people as possible? And I think assuming that you have to do it for everybody all at once is probably what stops people from starting.
Right. Yeah.
But saying, all right, so what are some small steps that we could take to make it accessible for a portion of Waypoint's constituents would be folks with disabilities. Start there and then ask questions about, all right, what else could we do that would make it accessible for more people?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that might be something that holds back gyms too, right? Because they see like the Spalding rehabilitation and they think they need all that fancy equipment to begin supporting people with disabilities. And kind of like you said, sometimes it's just an invitation and you have to then figure out what their needs are and solicit feedback and then respond to that accordingly. But I don't think many people, say like a wheelchair user, would come into a gym and if it's perfectly accessible, if the bathrooms are accessible, if the staff are friendly, but it doesn't have a treadmill gait trainer, specialized gait trainer, they'd be like, oh, this place stinks. Like, those are maybe like the small minutia that people get lost in. So sometimes it is as simple as inviting those people into your facility, because for a long time they haven't been, right?
Right. And that gate trainer is probably expensive. I don't know what that is,
exactly.
But I can imagine it would be an expensive piece of equipment. And we'll talk to land managers or people who manage a ropes course, for example, and oftentimes what people are most interested in is that expensive piece of equipment.
Yeah.
And how does that work and how much does it cost?
Yeah.
And then maybe that's the barrier, right? We couldn't afford that kind of thing. And so some of our staff who lead trainings around how does Waypoint make programs accessible in the outdoors, we'll do trainings. And one of my favorite lines from our education director, Eileen Turpin, she says, listen, it's not the $3,500 or $7,500 off-road wheelchair doesn't make this space accessible for the most people. What makes the space accessible for the most people is $30 worth of supplies from Staples, a whiteboard, markers, a picture schedule that you printed on your printer, slowing down the way we communicate, and asking questions. These are the things that make the space accessible to the most people.
Yeah.
And then having the off-road wheelchair, right, is really helpful for people who the barrier is that.
Yeah. Have you run into instances where there is a barrier and someone isn't able to participate?
So we do have some eligibility criteria where we'll ask questions around some health issues. So, for example, if somebody regularly has seizures, we'll ask a question around, okay, when's the last time you had a seizure? And are they managed by medication? And if the, answers to those questions are frequently and no, they're not managed, well, then maybe being out on the water isn't the best place for you to be. Or, but before we even get to maybe that's not the best place for you to be, it's all right. What are supports that we can put in place to mitigate the risks? So, right, if we're going out on the water, right, we obviously have life jackets. We have pontoons that kind of look like training wheels that you can put on the outside of a kayak so that it doesn't tip. We can ride in a tandem kayak so that you can have somebody with you supporting and helping to steer the boat. We don't have to go that far from shore, right? So there are all these things that we could do to say, all right, we can we can remove some of those risks or mitigate them as best as possible, and then get to a place where we feel comfortable with you participating, and you feel comfortable participating. So to answer the question, have you ever had somebody who we've had to say no to? Where we've said no has been around, like, are you able to, refrain from behaviors that pose a risk to yourself and others, right? So sometimes that's what people are struggling with. And I think that, like, those are the only times where we've had to say, okay, right, this line is being crossed. Yeah. You need to work on something yourself. And maybe here's some ways that we can support you before you come back. But the door's not closed forever. Mm-hmm. It's, again, like, all right, if you can work on these things and you can show demonstrated, improvements in this direction, come back.
Yeah. That's one of the personal, I guess, points of friction for me when I'm speaking on making gyms accessible or more inclusive, and just gyms as a whole, right? You're not going to retain every member. So when you have a member with a disability even who joins and then over time, whether they move away or they can't afford the gym anymore, or maybe the environment's not right for them and they leave, it feels to me like I'm speaking about making my gym accessible for everyone, but then I'm not actually accessible for everyone. And I think, I guess accessibility can't always be 100% universal. You can't be accessible for everyone. Like you said, like the path, the trail up the mountain isn't going to be accessible for every person at every point. But I guess it's just the striving for those like incremental improvements, maybe that's most important. We are grateful for the support of our first show sponsor. Resolution Fitness offers leading brand health club equipment and accessories for residential and commercial use. In addition to traditional exercise equipment, they specialize in adaptive fitness products and wheelchair accessible machines. If you're interested in outfitting your fitness facility or home gym to be more accessible, visit www.resolutionfitness.ca or the link in the show notes below.
Maybe another just place where people have given the feedback to Waypoint that, this doesn't feel like the space for me. On our open enrollment programs, so we do custom programs for already intact groups like a school or social service agency, but then we have programs that are open. And so you could have somebody from Lancaster, Massachusetts and Boston who come on a kayaking program or go rock climbing together. And so they're forming a group. On those days, you might have youth and adults and people with any number of different disabilities. And I think it's fair to say that, okay, while an adult with a physical disability has a disability and a youth who's autistic has a disability, right, they may not consider themselves peers. And you either just name it and, hey, we're a big diverse group of people today and we're acknowledging that fact and we all have ways that we can contribute and are going to need support today, but we can work together and go for this adventure and, set the goal of climbing the mountain today. Or we can say, oh, this just doesn't feel like the space for me. That's okay.
Yeah.
Right. That doesn't mean that it's bad. It just might not be for you.
Yeah.
And maybe there's another, adventure that is more who you would identify as your peers, right? That would be a better fit.
Yeah.
So I think there's beauty in both, right? There's beauty in finding like your people, right? Or your gym and having that sense of belonging that like, this is my place. And there's beauty in like when we get together with really diverse groups of people and we're coming from all different spaces and we don't look the same,
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's a good framework. Like, I mean, if I went to a yoga studio, that wouldn't feel like my place. Or if I went to one of your rock climbing programs and I'm afraid of heights, like maybe that's not my space, but that doesn't mean you have to completely overhaul your program to accommodate me, I guess. You can only serve so many people. You mentioned Eileen Turpin and education. Is she educating your staff, your participants? Do you guys educate other programs?
A little bit of all of the above.
Yeah.
So she is one of our program leads and has a master's in special education from Boston College. And so she oversees some of our curriculum that we're writing when we work in schools. And she's also doing training for our staff to continually, understand, okay, the nuances of working with one population versus, people with another type of disability. And she does also oversee some of the trainings that we would do for Outward Bound or a local rock climbing gym who's wanting to figure out, okay, how could we be more welcoming, inclusive, of folks with disabilities as they come into the gym. So Eileen would oversee, those types of trainings.
It's probably not a period of time that you want to reflect on too much, but I would imagine COVID derailed all programs. So how did you guys respond? What did you run during those initial months when things were locked down?
Yeah, well, the initial months, right, were terrifying.
Yeah, no one knowing, yeah.
Well, and the interesting thing, maybe just Waypoint story. So Adam Combs, who started Waypoint with me, was here from 2010 through February 28th, 2020. was his last day at Waypoint. And he and his family moved back down south where they're from, and they sort of wanted, their family to head back in that area. So he left Waypoint, and I didn't know if Waypoint could survive without Adam. He was a co-founder. A lot of our major donors were his friends and family, and a lot of the programming was his vision. So Adam leaves, and I'm now the executive director. And again, I don't know if Waypoint will survive without Adam. And then 12 days later, on March 12th, I send everybody home, not knowing what's going to happen. And so the early months, Eileen and other staff were finding, they were like doing grocery runs and taking books to support some of the teachers who were figuring out how to work with their students who were no longer coming to the classroom. So there was some of that scrambled. But then several months in, when we all realized you don't have to wash your groceries when you bring them back from the store, and we started to realize that being outside was actually the safest place any of us could be. And so we started doing private lessons where just with family members, or an individual, we could go on a hike or go kayaking. And then we started the whole bubble movement. And so people who would identify, yep, we're in a bubble together, we're coming out together. And schools and social service agencies and many other places where people with disabilities typically were spending time and getting supports were closed. And so Waypoint was one of the only, places that people could get together, spending time outside during the pandemic, right? For the general population across the United States was one of the ways we preserved our mental health, right? And for folks with disabilities, it's no different. They're people in the United States who discovered, I can spend time outside. So Waypoint actually grew during the pandemic because we had something that people needed and could provide. So it ended up being a cool experience for us as we figured out how to adapt and how to, change things to function within, right, the requirements that the state had. It was a challenging time. We partner very closely with Department of Conservation and Recreation. The new commissioner, Nicole LaChapelle, just in her first week on the job, came out on a program with Waypoint last Thursday. So I love DCR. And I stood with park manager at Walden Pond early on in the pandemic when there were hundreds of people in the pond on the beach, and yet organizations were not allowed to facilitate programs within the state park system because, guardrails had to be set somewhere. And unfortunately, that's where they got set, which meant that, if you were an individual who could get your own boat into the pond at Walden Pond, you had access. But if you relied on an organization like Waypoint to bring the kayaks and set them on the beach and help you into the boat, you didn't have access at that time. So it was challenging, and I think we learned a lot about just how we can. Waypoint preaches a lot about stepping out of your comfort zone. And then when I'm in the middle of a pandemic and figuring out how is this organization, my livelihood going to survive, I don't like being there, right? When you're put in a challenge that you didn't choose, it's challenging. So no, there was a lot of learning that happened during the pandemic.
Seems like the businesses that did survive that period of time, though, they did realize things that improved their business as a whole. I mean, we didn't have any scheduling system for our gym until COVID. People just came when they were available. But then when we had only 4 or 5 people at a time, everyone had to schedule sessions and we had to do these things. And it made it way better logistically to operate our gym. So there were some weird things that came out of that time. But maybe it's less so about COVID and more so just about responding to challenges and figuring out solutions. But
those are things you just, people ask about, how's Waypoint sustainable?
Yeah.
It's like, well, who was ready for a pandemic? Right? There are certain things that you just can't plan for, and then you work with the team that you have and the community. And
let's maybe talk about sustainability if you're okay. Speaking on the economics of it. So what's the structure of Waypoint from employees to program costs? Are people paying to participate in programs? Are there scholarships, et cetera? I guess what's the financials behind the organization?
Spending time outside, whether you're a mountain biker, kayaker, whether you play golf, right? These are things that Americans spend billions of dollars on every year. And it is expensive. And so on top of being a kayak guide or rock climbing guide, right, our team are also special educators and providing adaptive equipment. So the cost goes up, right? To provide an experience for anybody to be able to come, we have a giant toolbox, right, that our team has to draw from to be able to accommodate and support folks. So the programs are expensive. And right, if you or I, who are folks who don't identify as people with disabilities, if we were to hire a kayak guide to take us out, into the Boston Harbor, we might spend $150 to $175 for the day for that experience. Well, how many times a year are we doing that, right? Well, that's still a significant cost. On top of that cost, think about the adaptive equipment, the training, the recruiting and training of volunteers, the lesson planning that goes into the experience. All of those drive the cost up. And it's what it takes to make the experiences beautiful and meaningful and impactful. So to cover the cost of programs, we do ask participants to pay. I don't think that offering free programs is the best model. It hasn't been for us. We tried offering free programs, and often what happened then is if it's gray outside, right, or if you wake up with a tickle in your throat, show up. But let's say you're a wealthy individual, but you've put $10 for a registration fee. You wake up and it's gray outside, or you have a tickle in your throat. Like, yeah, but I registered. I paid $10. There's some skin in the game.
Yeah.
You show up.
Yeah.
So, and I think overall, this is my personal philosophy that has now is sort of waypoints. Is that people with disabilities are people, right? And some people need scholarships, and some people can pay, and some people can make a donation to provide a scholarship for somebody else. Again, talking about people, right? People.
Yeah.
So saying like, listen, this is what it costs, and can you pay it? So we have a fee structure that we ask people to pay. A lot of our programs, especially those through the Department of Conservation and Recreation, they have something called the Universal Access Program that's been around since the 80s. They want more people with disabilities accessing the state parks. So they run some programming themselves and hire vendors like Waypoint. And so they cover a portion of the cost, and then we charge a $20 registration fee for individuals who are coming out. Even with what DCR pays and the $20 registration fee, that's not covering our cost. Yeah. So the revenue that we generate from people paying, whether that's like state or an individual, that covers about 20% of, or it's 20% of our revenue is the fee for services that we charge. The other 80% is fundraising. And that's a mix of grants from foundations or gifts from individuals, or we have a little bit of corporate support. So we have a development fundraising team who that's their job is to figure out, okay, how do we fundraise what it takes, getting the community to invest in making these programs accessible by creating a way to pay for what it costs to provide them.
Since I'm in the early stages of my organization, and so I'm starting to see at what point do I hire someone to help with grants? At what point do I hire someone to help with fundraising and peer-to-peer fundraising for our races? Do you remember kind of what the development of the staffing structure for Waypoint was? Like you and Adam were operating it. Who was your first hire? What were they responsible for? Maybe outside of the people running the programs themselves, but more on the admin side.
Yeah. Well, the fun story we tell. So our first administrator was a woman named Nancy Nadowitz, and she had lots of experience working for Fidelity and Blue Cross Blue Shield, and was the executive director of a temple. And she came and worked part-time at Waypoint and brought so much administrative and business acumen to the organization. We were embarrassed. She came in and she's like, so where are your financial records? And we literally handed her a box top that was, flipped upside down. And it was all of our receipts. And I was like, okay, here's the receipts. And she said, well, how are they organized? And I was like, well, the most recent's on top, obviously.
Isn't that organized? Yeah.
So, business management, right, is what Nancy brought. And then we have worked with a number of people sort of in the fundraising department. So Steve Jewett was the first hire who helped us write our first grants, and have had a number of people in that role of development manager, development director. We hired our first full-time development director just 2 years ago. Rayanne Whalen is in that position now. I've had advice from multiple other executive directors who have said, if you got into this probably because you're passionate about what you're doing, the gym or accessible adventures. But if you're not equally committed to the fundraising side of things, you're not going to be successful because you won't be able to pay the great staff that you hired to do the mission. And another executive director told me, when's the right time to hire development people?
Now.
Right. Yesterday. Because they're this key component to telling the story to the community of this is what we're doing and this is what it costs to make it possible. Don't you want to be involved in making more of this happen in the world? You can be part of this team too. So
I think that's a necessary step for me. I guess it's a little intimidating to add 70, 80,000 or whatever in payroll to hire someone like that. And then hope that they, I guess, raise that and more.
Right.
But I think it's a necessary step to
And it never happens overnight, right? I have had I'm just looking for the golden ticket.
Yeah.
Like the Willy Wonka.
Not there.
You think, oh, this is going to be it, and then it's not. It takes time to develop and time to tell the story. And it's one of the parts of my job that's, I think, the most emotionally draining, right? Is the pressure that you feel when you have staff and a family. And, but I think that's any entrepreneur, right? This is not unique to nonprofits. It looks different, but anybody who started a business, right, feels that pressure of, how are we going to make this work?
For sure. Yeah. And the more people you take on, the more obligations you have, I guess, to support them. So there's something nice about operating on a small scale, but I guess if you want to impact more people, you can't operate in silos. But you mentioned telling stories. Is there a specific one that maybe stands out the most to you, whether it's a participant or experience?
There are lots of highlights that I have. And often I just say, the last adventure that I went on is the one that's most fresh, in my mind. So I still get on at least an adventure a month. And so I was on a bike ride that we ran, on the Neponset River Greenway. It was my first time on that trail, so right along the Boston Harbor. It was beautiful. That was just a little over a week ago. But a real highlight that happened recently was we went to Vermont. So we stayed at a place called Madbush Falls in Waitsfield, Vermont. Awesome location to do a gravel bike ride. So one of our board members, Pete Quinn, has wanted to do a ride in that area for a while. Pete has a degenerative neurological disease, and so it impacts his muscles. And so he has transitioned from riding an upright bike and loving to ride and race bikes to he rides a recumbent trike that has e-assist. And we gathered a bunch of Pete's friends, and we went to Vermont. So we had, I think, 17 riders, and we did a brutal ride for myself. And it was cool to see, right? Pete was one of the first people to the top of the hills. He's working just as hard as we are, right? But with his e-assist, kind of equalizes when we're on the uphills and the downs, how fast he's riding. And it was just a beautiful experience. I can maybe share a link. Pete wrote a little bit about our ride in his blog, and maybe I could share that.
Yeah, I can put it in the show notes. Yeah, it was a great story. What's your vision for the next few years as an organization? Do you guys have any bigger objectives, maybe on the national scale and then locally, kind of programmatically?
So almost 3 years ago, Adam, I said, was here through 2010, and he moved down to North Carolina. But he's rejoined Waypoint's team. He's leading, we opened our second branch in Western North Carolina, just outside of Asheville. And so that team down there has been leading programs now for the last 2 years and is doing an awesome job. In Massachusetts, we are outgrowing our current space. So we rent space in Lexington. And so we're starting to explore, what's the next space look like? Where is it? I don't know yet. So that's a challenge and an opportunity that we're exploring right now. The idea that we talked about a little bit of just sharing or how to make the world more accessible by sharing some of what Waypoint does on our outdoor adventure programs with other organizations who might be able to do similar things in their spaces gets me really excited. So I hope that we're able to do more of that as we go forward. Yeah.
If people want to learn more about the organization or get involved, we can include the exact links in the show notes. So you don't necessarily have to spell it out, but where's the best places for them to find you?
Yeah, I would say our website. Yeah. So waypointadventure.org is the website. And that if you're interested, the 3 ways I tell people you can get involved are you can participate. There's a register now button at the top of the homepage. You can volunteer. We can't facilitate our programs without a lot of volunteers. Or you can donate. And those are sort of the 3 ways if people are interested to get involved.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. Obviously, been a huge fan of Waypoint for a while with you just in our backyard here. It's an organization that's always been on my radar. I've appreciated what you guys have done for our road races here in Massachusetts. But probably will continue to pick your brain in the coming years, since I'm 5 or 10 years behind you in my nonprofit's development, and I'm sure I could learn a lot from you. So,
Brendan, thank you very much for having me. This has been great.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you for listening to the AdaptX podcast. Our effort to amplify the ideas of our guests and create more inclusive and accessible industries is futile unless these episodes reach a larger audience. If you enjoyed our discussion today, please leave us a rating or a review on whichever platform you use. And if you would like to learn more about AdaptX, the course that we teach to health and fitness professionals and the projects that our organization is working on, you can subscribe to our newsletter through our website, www.adaptx.org. Until next Monday.